Somebody needs to turn you on.
I think I'm on.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and all the members of the committee and my fellow panelists. And thanks for taking into account my travel schedule. I filed extensive comments with the committee, going through the dozens of midnight regulations passed by the Bush administration over the past couple of months that impact the environment. I'm going to focus on 4 of those today very, very quickly, because these are regulations that we think should be seriously considered by your committee and by Congress for review under the Congressional Review Act. And also, we strongly support the passage of Congressman Nadler's proposed legislation, which could deal with some of these problems. Very briefly, the Endangered Species Act waiver, which waives the Endangered Species Act requirement for the Pentagon, for the Energy Department, for all other government agencies to engage in consultations with the National Marine Fisheries and Fish and Wildlife Service when they're going to engage in an action that is going to harm one of these species. Number 2, the hazardous waste regulation, which exempts 3 million tons of the most highly toxic hazardous waste from regulation under RCRA. It's clear that this is going to significantly damage public health if we allow this to continue. Number 3, the CAFO rules. CAFOs, are factory farms, are the worst single polluters of water in America today. They produce 500 million tons of waste every year. Smithfield Foods has one facility called the Circle 4 in Utah, which has 850,000 hogs. It produces more waste than all the human beings in New York City combined every day. New York City has spent about $20 billion building sewage treatment plants to treat its waste so that it doesn't pollute the Hudson River and its environs. Smithfield simply dumps that waste into the environment. It's illegal. They've been able to corrupt public officials in order to get away with this. They cannot produce a pound of pork or a pound of bacon or a pork chop cheaper and more efficiently than a family farmer, a traditional farmer, unless they break the law, unless they shift their cleanup costs to the public. Their cleanup costs are much greater than those that accrue on traditional farms. The Raleigh News and Observer in 1993 won the Pulitzer Prize for a 5-part series that showed how factory farmers had corrupted virtually every relevant official in the state to get them to overlook the pollution from these facilities. Their whole business plan contemplates illegal behavior and their capacity to avoid enforcement of that. They were easily able to do that during the Bush administration, which was willing to overlook this illegal and corrupt behavior that was damaging communities, the environment, putting family farmers out of work. Now the Bush administration has institutionalized that lack of enforcement through this bill. Finally, the buffer zone rule, and this to me is the most important one, Mr. Chairman. This is the rule that this is the last barrier that imposed any controls at all on mountaintop removal. A couple of weeks ago, I flew over the Cumberland, and I saw, if the American people could see what I saw in West Virginia and eastern Kentucky, there would be a revolution in this country. We are literally cutting down the Appalachian Mountains with these historic landscapes where Daniel Boone and Davy Crockett roam, with these giant machines called drag lines, which are 22 stories high. I flew under one of them in a Piper Cup. They cost $500 million, and they practically dispense with the need for human labor, which indeed is the point. I remember a conversation I had with my father when I was 14 years old during the 1960s when he was fighting strip mining in Appalachia. And he said to me, they're not just destroying the environment, but they're permanently impoverishing these communities because there's no way that they can regenerate an economy from these barren moonscapes that are left behind. And he said they're doing it so they can break the unions. And that's exactly what they did. When he told me that, there were 140,000 unionized mine workers in West Virginia digging coal out of tunnels in the ground. Today, there are fewer than 11,000 miners left in the state unionized because the strip industry isn't. They're taking more coal out of West Virginia than they were in 1968. The only difference is back then, at least some of that money was being left in the state for salaries, for pensions, for reinvestment in the communities. Today, it's all going straight up to Wall Street, to the corporate headquarters of Massey Coal, Peabody Coal, Arch Coal, and the big banking houses like Bank of America and Morgan, which own these operations. 95% of the coal in West Virginia are owned by out-of-state operations, mainly on Wall Street. They are liquidating the state for cash using these giant machines, 2,500 tons of explosives that they detonate every day in the state of West Virginia, the equivalent of a Hiroshima bomb once a week. They're blowing the tops off the mountains to get at the coal seams beneath. Then they take the rock, debris, and rubble, and they plow it into the adjacent river valley. They bury the rivers. They flatten the hollows. They have already buried, according to EPA, 1,200 miles of rivers and streams. They have cut down the 460 biggest mountains in West Virginia. By the time they get done, within a decade, they will have flattened an area the size of Delaware. It's all illegal. You cannot in the United States take rock, debris, and rubble and dump it into a waterway without a Clean Water Act permit, and you could never get a permit to do such a thing. So we sued them, the environmental community, Joe Lovett, Kentuckians for the Commonwealth, in front of a conservative Republican federal judge, Judge Charles Hayden. And Judge Hayden said the same thing I did. In the middle of that hearing, Judge Hayden questioned the Corps of Engineers colonel who had allowed all this to happen and said to him, "This is obviously illegal. How could you let this happen?" And the Corps colonel said to him, "I don't know, Your Honor. We just kind of oozed into it." And Judge Hayden ended that hearing by giving us a complete victory, by banning all mountaintop mining, saying it's illegal from day one, and it's illegal today, and he enjoined all of it. 2 days from when we got that decision, lobbyists for Massey Coal and Peabody Coal met in the back door of the Interior Department with Stephen J. Griles, Gail Norton's first deputy chief, who was a former lobbyist for Massey Coal and Peabody Coal, and who is now serving a 10.5-month jail sentence. And they rewrote one word, the interpretation of one word of the Clean Water Act, the definition of the word fill, to change 30 years of statutory interpretation to effectively overrule Judge Hayden's decision and allow mountaintop mining, allow the disposal of rock, debris, rubble, garbage, any solid material into any water body of the United States in all 50 states today. The one barrier that we were left with after this destruction that happened from the Interior Department because of Griles was the stream buffer rule that said you can't dispose of the stuff within 100 feet of a perennial or ephemeral stream. These are the most important streams because they feed the whole watershed. That law was left in place. And as a favor to the industry, in the last days of the Bush administration, this White House, which was the indentured servants for the worst of the worst of the worst of these polluters, simply got rid of that rule, the last barrier to cutting down the entire Appalachian Mountains. Let me just say one final thing. During the Pleistocene Ice Age, when my home, where my home is in Mount Kisco, New York, was under 2 miles of ice, and the rest of North America was turned into tundra with no trees left, the last refuge for those trees, they all retreated into one place, which was the Appalachian Mountains of West Virginia and eastern Kentucky. That's where they survived the Ice Age. And when the ice withdrew, all the forests in North America were reseeded from Appalachia. That's why it is the richest forest on Earth, the richest ecosystem, temperate ecosystem on the face of the Earth, because it's the only one that survived the Ice Age. And today, these companies, out of greed and ignorance, are accomplishing what the glaciers couldn't do, which is flattening those mountains and stealing our forests. And this Congress ought to do something about it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.